Now imagine that you live in a quiet little town where nothing ever happens, where everyone knows each other's names, and crime is something you only hear about on big city news. Then one person dies, then a second, then a third. Each time, it looks like an accident. Too clean, too calm, too ordinary. What would you do if you realized that a serial killer lived right next door to you, and you saw him almost every day? The body was found just after sunrise, when the morning fog still clung to the cornfields like a damp blanket. A 13-year-old boy named Owen Pierce had climbed the old grain silo on the edge of Red Hollow to dare his friends the night before. By morning, he was dead at the bottom of it, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle, his sneakers dusted with yellow corn powder. The sheriff called it a tragic accident. Red Hollow, Kansas was the kind of town where tragedies were supposed to come from droughts, not from death. It had one main street, a diner with cracked red booths, a feed store, a two-room clinic, and a faded movie theater that hadn't shown a new film since 1959. People left their doors unlocked, they waved at passing cars, they trusted each other. And that was exactly why no one looked twice at Luther Crowley when he stood among the small crowd near the silo fence, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Luther was 38, thin as a fence post, with pale gray eyes and neatly parted dark hair. He ran a modest photography shop on Main Street, portraits, weddings, school pictures. He had moved from Chicago 5 years earlier, saying he wanted a quieter life. People thought he was odd, but harmless, the kind of man who apologized too much and avoided eye contact. Standing a few feet behind him was his wife, Maribel. Maribel Crowley was 34, with warm brown skin and sharp, intelligent eyes. She worked as a nurse at the Red Hollow Clinic. Patients loved her. She spoke softly, touched shoulders when people cried, and brought homemade pastries to work on Sundays. Her Puerto Rican accent made her sound gentle, almost musical. No one in Red Hollow suspected that the Crowleys were watching the scene with something other than grief. Luther's mind was still replaying the moment from the night before. Owen had laughed when Luther offered to show him something cool inside the silo. The boy had trusted him. Everyone trusted Luther. The rope ladder had been cut almost clean through before Owen climbed down. The fall had done the rest. It wasn't rage that drove Luther. It was control, the stillness afterward, the quiet order he felt when a living thing became an object. Maribel had waited in their car down the dirt road, timing everything on her wristwatch. When Luther returned, shaking and pale, she had simply taken his hand and said, "You did fine. No one saw." Now, as the sheriff taped off the area and the boy's mother screamed into a handkerchief, Maribel leaned closer to Luther and whispered, "First one always brings noise. The next ones will be cleaner." They drove home in silence. Their house sat at the edge of town, a modest white place with a porch swing and trimmed hedges. Inside, it smelled faintly of chemicals from Luther's basement darkroom. Photographs lined the walls, smiling couples, newborn babies, graduation portraits. None of the pictures on display were dangerous. The dangerous ones were hidden in a locked drawer beneath the enlarger. Luther washed his hands for a long time at the kitchen sink, scrubbing until his knuckles turned red. "I didn't like that he begged," he said quietly. Maribel poured him a glass of milk and set it in front of him. "You don't like any of that part. That's why I'm here." She wasn't afraid of him. She had seen his darkness early in their marriage, back when he still woke up screaming from dreams of drowning strangers. Instead of leaving, she had helped him shape it, guide it. Make it quiet. We stick to the plan, she said. We pick people no one will fight for. We make it look natural. Accidents, illness, stupidity. Luther nodded slowly. Outside, church bells rang for 8 o'clock. In town, people mourned a boy they thought had died by chance. In the Crowley basement, a new roll of film waited to be developed. And somewhere in Luther's mind, a list had already begun to form. The death of Earl Watkins barely made the second page of the Red Hollow Gazette. He was 62, overweight, and known for forgetting his blood pressure pills. When he was found slumped over in his chair inside the school boiler room, no one questioned the sheriff's conclusion. Heart attack. Earl had been the night janitor at Red Hollow High for nearly 20 years. He lived alone in a trailer outside town. No wife, no children, no one to argue the official story. The only strange detail was that his insulin levels were through the roof, even though Earl was not diabetic. The county coroner shrugged it off as a lab error. In a town like Red Hollow, people didn't go looking for hidden meanings. Luther Crowley had gone looking for Earl months before the murder. He had noticed him through the window of his photography shop, sweeping the sidewalk late at night, always alone, always slow. Luther followed him one evening, keeping his distance, memorizing his routine. Earl stopped at the diner at exactly 9:47 p.m. every Thursday. Black coffee, 1 slice of apple pie. Luther told Maribel about him that night while she washed dishes. He's perfect, Luther said. No one checks on him. No one would miss him right away. Maribel didn't ask why. She never did anymore. Instead, she opened her purse and took out a small vial. Insulin, she said. From the clinic. Expired stock. No one tracks it. The plan was simple. Maribel volunteered to work a late shift at the school clinic room during a basketball game. Luther arrived an hour later, carrying his camera bag. He wore his usual nervous smile. No one stopped him. Everyone knew him. Earl was already inside the boiler room, sitting on a folding chair, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. Luther knocked softly. Sheriff asked me to take some photos for the yearbook. He lied. Maintenance shots. For the budget request. Earl waved him in. Don't see why they need pictures of a damn boiler, he muttered. Luther stepped closer. He pretended to adjust his camera. Then he felt his hands start to shake. He hated this part. The moment before. The moment when the world was still normal. Maribel's voice echoed in his head. You don't like any of that part. That's why I'm here. He plunged the syringe into Earl's arm. Earl gasped, knocking over his thermos. Coffee spilled across the concrete floor. What the hell? Luther pushed him back into the chair, held him there, watched his eyes go wide, watched his breathing slow into a wet, broken rhythm. It took 4 minutes. Luther stayed until it was over. He wiped the syringe clean, put it back in his bag. Then he sat in the chair across from the body and waited another 10 minutes, just to be sure. Maribel met him in the hallway near the gym. The crowd was still loud. No one noticed them. Did it work? She asked. Luther nodded. He felt hollow, but also calm. They drove home separately. By morning, Earl Watkins was dead from a natural cause. The sheriff shook his head sadly. Poor bastard, he said. Didn't even make it to retirement. At the Crowley house, Maribel poured Luther a glass of milk. First real one, she said. You did fine. Luther stared at his reflection in the glass. He looked at me like he knew, he said. "They always do," Maribel replied. "That's the last honest look they ever give anyone." Outside, church bells rang again, and somewhere deep in Luther's chest, the list grew longer. 3 months after Earl Watkins died, another accident shook Red Hollow. This one happened at the Blue Ribbon Laundromat on Main Street, just after closing time. The victim was Nora Bell, 51 years old, owner and sole employee of the place for over 2 decades. She lived in a small apartment above the laundromat and had no close family left in Kansas. The first person to find her was a delivery driver dropping off detergent crates at 6 in the morning. He opened the back door and heard the machine still running. Inside, he saw Nora's hair tangled in the metal drum of an industrial washer, her body folded at an impossible angle, water and soap foam spilling across the tiled floor. The sheriff called it a freak accident, slipped, hit her head, got pulled in by the spinning drum. "Happens more than people think," he told the Gazette reporter. The town believed him. They wanted to. Luther had been watching Nora for weeks. He sat in the corner of her laundromat pretending to read photography magazines while timing her routines. She always closed at 9:30 p.m., always locked the front door first, always cleaned the lint traps last. On Tuesdays, she stayed late to wash her own clothes. Luther noticed that she limped slightly when she walked. Bad knee, slow reactions. "She's alone every night," Luther told Maribel. "No one would hear her." Maribel didn't smile. She rarely did anymore. "Then we make it look like her mistake," she said. The night it happened, Luther came in just before closing. He pretended one of his prints had been stained and asked if he could run a quick wash. Nora agreed. She trusted him. Everyone in Red Hollow trusted Luther. While she bent over to clean a lint filter, Luther stepped behind her and shoved her head into the open washer drum. She screamed once before he slammed the door shut and turned the machine on. He held it closed while it filled with water. He felt the vibrations through his palms. He felt his stomach twist. He did not let go. It was louder than he expected. He left before the cycle ended. Maribel was waiting in the car across the street, engine running. "Did she suffer?" she asked. Luther nodded. Maribel exhaled slowly. "Good," she said. "Means it will look messy. Accidents are messy." The police found no fingerprints, no signs of a struggle outside the machine. The coroner ruled it accidental drowning with blunt force trauma. But this time, something felt wrong to at least one man. Detective Harold Keane had been transferred to the county sheriff's department a year earlier. He was 45, quiet, with a scar along his jaw from the Korean War. He stood in the laundromat, staring at the washer drum, longer than anyone else. "That machine door doesn't lock from the inside," he said. "Someone had to hold it shut." The sheriff laughed it off. "You think she killed herself with a washing machine, Harold?" Keane didn't answer. He wrote something in his notebook instead. 2 accidents, 2 lonely people, both dead within months. It wasn't enough for a pattern, not yet. But for the first time, the idea of coincidence started to crack. And in the Crowley basement, another roll of film was carefully labeled and locked away. The third death came in late August, when the heat pressed down on Red Hollow like a heavy hand. The victim was Raymond Cole, a 49-year-old farmer who lived 3 miles outside town. He was found buried in a shallow trench behind his barn, his face blue, his mouth packed with dirt. At first glance, it looked like a workplace accident. Raymond had been digging a drainage line for weeks. The sheriff told reporters that the trench walls must have collapsed on him. "Unstable soil," he said. "Happens all the time." But when Detective Harold Keane arrived at the scene, he noticed something the others missed. The trench walls were intact, clean. The dirt around Raymond's body looked shoveled in, not fallen. And there were tire tracks too close to the trench for comfort. Luther had chosen Raymond because he liked being alone. He liked the quiet fields. He liked the way the wind moved through corn. Raymond Cole had complained once in the diner about his ex-wife taking the kids to Wichita. "Nobody would notice if I vanished for a week," he had joked. Luther remembered that line. He followed Raymond for days, learning his schedule. He worked alone behind the barn every afternoon from 4 to 6. "We can use the tractor," Luther told Maribel. "It will make it look real." Maribel stole a sedative from the clinic. Not enough to kill, just enough to slow someone down. On the day it happened, she drove Luther out to Raymond's farm in their station wagon. She pretended the car had overheated near the barn. Raymond came over to help. He was kind. That made it easier and harder at the same time. Maribel offered him a bottle of water. The sedative was already inside. By the time Raymond realized something was wrong, his legs were heavy, and his words were slurred. Luther came from behind and struck him with a shovel. Not hard enough to kill, just enough to drop him into the trench. Raymond tried to scream. Luther shoved dirt into his mouth to stop the sound. Then he started filling the trench back in. It took longer than he expected. His arms burned, his hands shook. Raymond kicked weakly at first, then not at all. When it was done, Luther stood over the packed dirt, breathing hard. He felt nothing. Not relief, not excitement, just emptiness. Maribel wiped his face with a handkerchief. "You did what you had to do," she said. They drove away before sunset. By morning, Raymond Cole was missing. 2 days later, a neighbor smelled something strange near the barn. The body was found that evening. The town called it another tragedy, another accident. But Detective Keane did not. He stood at the trench with his hands on his hips, staring at the soil pattern. "Someone buried him," he said quietly. "This wasn't a collapse." The sheriff sighed. "You're chasing ghosts, Harold?" Keane wrote another note in his notebook. 3 deaths, 3 lonely people, 3 accidents that weren't quite accidents. For the first time, he circled a single word on the page: pattern. And in the Crowley basement, 3 labeled rolls of film now sat side by side. The 4th death finally broke Red Hollow's illusion of safety. Her name was Lily Grant. She was 22, a waitress at the Dusty Star Diner, and one of the few young people in town who still smiled easily. She rented a room behind the diner and worked double shifts to save money for nursing school. When she was found dead in her bathroom, a half-empty bottle of industrial cleaner beside her, the sheriff called it suicide. "Young girl, too much pressure," he told the Gazette. "Happens all the time." But people whispered. Lily had been laughing at work the night before. She had talked about moving to Topeka. Suicide didn't fit. Luther had noticed Lily because she reminded him of someone he used to photograph in Chicago, someone who had trusted him once. He started coming to the diner more often, always ordering coffee, always leaving a big tip. Lily thought he was just another lonely man. He listened to her talk about her dreams. He remembered them. "She's not like the others," Luther told Maribel one night. "She still has a future." Maribel didn't like that. "That's exactly why she's like the others," she said. People with futures are easier to break. The plan was different this time. More personal. More intimate. Maribel invited Lily to their house under the excuse of giving her hand-me-down clothes. "I have too many dresses I never wear," she told her at the diner. Lily agreed. She liked Maribel. Everyone did. When Lily arrived, Maribel made her tea. She talked about nursing school, about how hard life could be. The cleaner was already mixed into the sugar bowl. By the time Lily started coughing, her throat was burning. She dropped her cup. She begged for water. Luther stood in the doorway, frozen. He hated this one more than the others. Maribel held Lily's head and whispered, "It will be over soon." Lily vomited on the kitchen floor. Her breathing turned into wet gasps. When she stopped moving, Maribel wiped her mouth and closed her eyes. "We have to make it look right," she said. They carried Lily's body into the bathroom. They placed the cleaner bottle in her hand. They wrote a short fake note in her handwriting, copied from a receipt she had signed at the diner. Then they drove her car back to her room behind the diner and staged the scene. It almost worked. Almost. The next morning, Lily's friend from the diner told Detective Keane something strange. "She said she was going to someone's house last night," the girl said. "Some nurse lady, Maribel or something." Keane felt a cold pinch in his stomach. He wrote the name down. It was the first time the Crowleys' world cracked. And in the basement, Luther developed a photograph that made his hands shake. Lily's face, frozen mid-cough. He hid it behind the others. 4 deaths. 4 accidents. And 1 witness who hadn't stayed quiet. By October, Red Hollow no longer believed in accidents. The Gazette ran a front-page headline for the first time in years. 4 dead in 6 months, coincidence or crime. People started locking their doors. Parents walked their children to school. The diner emptied out after dark. The sheriff finally agreed to open an official investigation. Detective Harold Keane was put in charge. He spread the files across his desk and stared at the photographs for hours. Earl Watkins, Nora Bell, Raymond Cole, Lily Grant, different ages, different jobs, different causes of death, but the same pattern of isolation. No close family. No one who would raise hell. Keane circled that word again. Vulnerable. He started with Lily. Her case bothered him the most. The suicide note felt wrong. Too neat. Too short. And the cleaner bottle was from a brand sold only at the hospital supply store. He visited the Red Hollow Clinic. Maribel greeted him with a warm smile. "Detective Keane, right?" she said. "How can I help you?" He asked about missing cleaning chemicals, about expired insulin stock, about sedatives. Maribel answered everything calmly. She even showed him inventory logs. Nothing was officially missing. "People steal weird things," she said softly. "Teenagers, drunks, you'd be surprised." Keane wasn't surprised. He was uneasy. Next, he visited Luther's photography shop. Luther nearly dropped his camera when he saw the badge. I don't think I've done anything wrong," he stammered. Keane asked him about Lily. Luther said he barely knew her. Just a waitress who served him coffee sometimes. "She talked about nursing school," Luther added too quickly. Keane noticed that. He wrote it down. He checked the back room of the shop. Chemicals for developing photos. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious, but something about the place felt off. Too clean. Too controlled. That night, Keane reviewed his notes. 1 nurse. 1 photographer. Both connected to Lily. Both connected indirectly to the clinic and chemicals. It wasn't proof. Not even close. But it was a thread. He requested permission to quietly monitor the Crowleys. The sheriff rolled his eyes. You think a nurse and a picture taker are serial killers? Keane didn't answer. Outside the station, the first snow of the year began to fall. At the Crowley house, Maribel noticed the car parked down the street for the third night in a row. We're being watched, she said. Luther's hands started shaking again. We should stop, he whispered. Maribel took his face in her hands. No, she said. We just have to be smarter. And in the basement, a cardboard box labeled supplies was quietly moved to a deeper, darker corner. Luther started making mistakes. Small ones at first. The kind that only mattered if someone was already watching. He forgot to lock the basement door one night. He left a vial of sedative in his coat pocket. He developed film while his hands were still shaking. Maribel noticed everything. You're unraveling, she told him. You need to focus. But Luther couldn't. Lily's face kept coming back to him, her eyes, her hands clawing at the kitchen floor. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. And one night he did the one thing Maribel had warned him never to do. He photographed a body after death. It was a stray moment from their past crimes. A single shot of Lily's face, printed on a small, glossy sheet. He hid it inside a random envelope and forgot about it. Detective Keane noticed the envelope 2 days later. He was back at Luther's shop under the excuse of ordering new ID photos for the sheriff's department. While Luther worked in the front, Keane wandered into the back room. On a cluttered shelf, he saw a plain envelope with no label. It was slightly thicker than it should have been. He opened it. The photograph inside made his stomach tighten. Lily Grant, pale, lips stained, eyes half open. Not a funeral photo. Not a police photo. A private photo. Taken up close. Keane slipped the photo back and left without saying a word. That evening, he pulled Lily's case file and compared handwriting. The fake suicide note. The photo envelope. Similar slant. Similar spacing. He drove past the Crowley house twice. The porch light was on. He called the sheriff. We need a warrant, he said. I think I found our killers. The sheriff hesitated. You better be damn sure, Harold. I am, Keane said. They got the warrant the next morning. When the deputies knocked on the Crowley door, Maribel answered calmly. Is something wrong? She asked. They searched the house room by room. At first, they found nothing. Then one deputy opened the basement door. The smell hit first. Chemicals. Old metal. Something sour. They found the box of sedatives. The expired insulin vials. The shovel with dried dirt still clinging to the blade. And finally, the locked drawer beneath the enlarger. Inside were 4 labeled rolls of film. Earl, Nora, Raymond, Lily, and a bundle of personal items. A janitor's watch, a diner name tag, a farmer's belt buckle, a waitress's bracelet. Maribel didn't cry. Luther did. He collapsed onto the basement floor, rocking back and forth. I didn't mean to, he kept saying. I didn't mean to. Keane stood over him, silent. The pattern was no longer a theory. It was evidence. They tried to run. Not far, not fast. But they tried. While deputies were still cataloging evidence in the basement, Maribel asked to use the bathroom. A young officer nodded and followed her down the hallway. When he turned his head for half a second, Maribel grabbed a ceramic lamp from the table and smashed it into his temple. He went down hard. She screamed for Luther. He was already halfway to the back door, panic in his eyes. They ran into the cold morning air. Snow crunched under their shoes as they bolted toward their station wagon. Sirens erupted behind them. Maribel drove. Luther sat in the passenger seat, shaking, clutching his head. They made it 3 miles out of town before a patrol car blocked the highway. Maribel tried to ram it. The engine died instead. Deputies dragged them out at gunpoint and pinned them to the icy road. Luther sobbed uncontrollably. It wasn't supposed to end like this, he kept repeating. At the station, they were put in separate rooms. Detective Keane took Maribel first. She sat straight-backed, hands folded in her lap. "You can save yourself a lot of trouble," Keane said. "Your husband's already talking." It was a lie. Maribel smiled anyway. "Luther couldn't plan a grocery list without me," she said. "You know that." Keane slid a photo across the table. Lily's face. "Tell me about her," he said. Maribel stared at it for a long time. Then she exhaled. "She begged," she said, quietly. "That always makes it worse." It was enough. Meanwhile, Luther cracked within 20 minutes. He confessed to everything: the silo, the boiler room, the laundromat, the farm, the kitchen. He told Keane about the film, the list, the feeling of control. He cried when he talked about Lily. He didn't cry when he talked about the others. By nightfall, the case was airtight. The Crowleys were officially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Red Hollow gathered outside the station, silent and stunned. People stared at the windows, waiting to see monsters. Instead, they saw 2 ordinary people being led away in handcuffs. The trial of Luther and Maribel Crowley began in May of 1967 and turned Red Hollow into a media circus. Reporters came from Wichita, Topeka, even Kansas City. For the first time in its history, the town had satellite trucks parked near the courthouse. People lined up before sunrise to get a seat inside. Some came out of curiosity. Some came out of anger. Some just wanted to see the faces of the people who had fooled them for years. Luther looked smaller in a suit. His hands never stopped trembling. Maribel looked exactly the same as she always had. Calm, composed, almost bored. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. They presented the sedatives from the basement, the insulin vials, the shovel, the cleaning chemicals. Then they showed the photographs. One by one, Earl Watkins in the boiler room chair, Nora Bell tangled in the washer, Raymond Cole half buried in dirt, Lily Grant on the kitchen floor. People in the courtroom cried. One woman fainted. The defense tried to argue that Luther had acted alone and that Maribel was a manipulated wife. That strategy collapsed on the second day. Detective Keane testified about the inventory logs from the clinic, about Maribel's access to medical supplies, about her calm behavior during the search. Then Lily's friend from the diner took the stand. "She said she was going to a nurse's house," the girl said, voice shaking. "She said her name was Maribel." The final blow came when Luther himself testified. Against his lawyer's advice, he took the stand and told the truth. "She planned everything," he said, pointing at Maribel. "I just did what she told me to do." Maribel didn't react. She didn't even look at him. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts for both defendants. The judge didn't hesitate. "The crimes committed by Luther and Maribel Crowley show a complete and calculated disregard for human life," he said. "This court sentences you both to death by electrocution." A sound went through the courtroom like a wave. Some people gasped. Some people cheered. Luther collapsed into his chair, sobbing. Maribel finally showed emotion. She smiled. They spent 4 years on death row. The appeals were short. The evidence was too strong. The state of Kansas did not waste time on mercy. Luther aged quickly in his cell. His hair went gray. His hands shook even when he slept. He wrote letters to no one. Pages and pages of apologies that were never sent. Sometimes he begged the guards to let him see Maribel. They always said no. Maribel did not change. She read books. She exercised. She wrote neat letters to her sister in Puerto Rico, never mentioning the murders. When a prison psychologist asked if she felt regret, she answered calmly, "Regret is a luxury for people who make mistakes." We didn't. The execution date was set for November 3, 1971. They were brought to the death chamber separately. Luther went first. He was strapped into the electric chair, sobbing, whispering Lily's name. When the switch was pulled, his body stiffened, then went still. He was pronounced dead at 12:07 a.m. Maribel was next. She walked into the chamber without resistance. She looked at the chair and then at the witnesses behind the glass. Detective Keane was among them. This was always how it was going to end, she said softly. When the current hit her, she did not scream. She was pronounced dead at 12:19 a.m. Red Hollow never fully recovered. The photography shop closed. The Crowley house was torn down. The laundromat changed owners. The diner repainted its walls. People still talked about the case in low voices years later, about how evil didn't come from the shadows. It came from polite smiles, from quiet hands, from people they thought they knew. Detective Keane retired in 1975. He kept the old notebook in a drawer, the one with the word pattern circled on the page. Sometimes he took it out and looked at it. He never forgot how close they all came to never seeing the truth. And somewhere, in a police evidence locker, 4 rolls of film still sat side by side, labeled silent. The list was finished, but the memory of it never would be.